introducing Dr. Zuo, so you have some idea of this, who he is and how he got here and the lineage. And then the second part of that is kind of moving through a brief introduction to Zuo acupuncture, and then try to get you some ideas of how you might use this particular idea of how you would treat a patient with yang deficiency and blood stasis. Right? So that's part of what he does. Okay, so Master Zuo's aim in Zuo acupuncture. So really over the years, right, as he was doing his Dong's acupuncture, he was had some incredible experiences with patients that he was working with, and he began to think that it's possible that these phenomena that he was seeing that were also seen in like Taoist alchemy practices, that it was possible to move those cultivation techniques, which involve a lot of qigong, people who know qigong, a lot of mental activities, physical activities, to move them to needles, right? To move them to needles. So in other words, the secrets inside these texts, right, which move qi in our qi mechanism, right, that we are using the same qi mechanism in Chinese medicine, but can we use needles instead of these Taoist practices to achieve the same results, right? So this idea that he has of expressing the Tao through acupuncture, right? If Taoists are in tune with the Tao, they're doing these cultivation techniques that are to make them more in tune with the Tao. Is it possible to do that through acupuncture, right? So even to the degree that Zuo was trying to establish an acupuncture system or an acupuncture cultivation gateway. In meditation practice, we talk about gateways. There's mantras that you can use as gateways. There is anapana breathing you can use as gateways. There's Taoists, qigong practices that are numerous and that you can use as gateways. But could acupuncture also be a gateway? Okay. So Taoist alchemy acupuncture. Part of Zuo's definition is a system of acupuncture developed over 20 years that expresses Taoist alchemy, physiology, and self-cultivation. Right? This kind of thinking through acupuncture stimulation, something that I just iterated a moment ago. So we're going to talk quite a bit about Dr. Zuo here, but one, you're going to see that he is a clinician. He was primarily he was trained formally as a clinician. But in all of his life, he has a list towards being a literary scholar, a writer, and what he would claim eventually into an acupuncture artist, right? That artistic nature and creativity applied to acupuncture. So he delved into the thinking and research behind the three treasures we know as our three treasures and Taoist alchemy. And what you're going to hear today doesn't necessarily correspond directly to what you might read in the Neijing. Right? These are going to be more connected to these Taoist texts. Right? So this slide, in my opinion, is a slide you might see if I was introducing him in China, right? Or if you had his business card, right? In which you would see who is Master Zuo Chang-Bo, and you have all of these, appellations of, and titles that he has, and he has a lot of them, and he has more probably since I made this slide set, but he is, well respected within the Chinese medicine community in China, and particularly in people who are interested in classical and traditional Chinese medicine. But for us, that's not necessarily the most important thing. We need to know a little about, how he got to be who he is, right? And this is where people who have some background in Dong's acupuncture have sort of a potential interest in this, and also a potential, as we go along, a little bit easier understanding. So I would say that the reason why we as Westerners haven't really heard as much of Dr. Zuo Chang-Bo is really because he's done very little in English. He's done no kind of translations of his work, and he's very happy in his Chinese world, right? So let me give you some idea. so he was born in Shandong in Qingdao, right? And what is important in some ways about that is that, and he comes from the countryside, which in China can sometimes be looked down upon as opposed to the kind of the city and big cities. But he originally comes from the countryside in actually a village called Zuo, which is named, everybody in the village has kind of his surname. But the reason why I emphasize that is because when you'll learn that the person who he admires most, which is Dong Jingchang, the founder of Dong's acupuncture, or at least the lineage bearer of Dong's acupuncture in our lifetimes, that he was also from Qingdao, right? I think Pudong, I think is I may not have the name right, but or Puding or something. But he was from there. So they share this connection, right? Now, he was a clinician in the 1990s. He was having trouble as an acupuncturist in terms of like really gelling with the information that he had, the traditional acupuncture that he was learning in school, and then practicing it. And then he got a copy. He got a copy of Yang Weijie's Dong's acupuncture book. And it was a pirated copy, as many things were in China. But when he read it, he's like, there's something incredible about this. And so he found a way to get from mainland China to Taiwan, which was not easy during the 1990s. And when he got there, he studied with Dr. Yang, who is considered the second generation lineage master of Dong's acupuncture in the world. But he got a chance to work with him. And he said after I think he was there for like 3 months, or 2 to 3 months. And then when he was very grateful for Dr. Yang for giving him 3 things. The first thing he gave him was, unlike other students of Dr. Yang's, when Dr. Yang was doing the diagnosis and then moved to the treatment, Dr. Yang allowed him to follow him into the treatment room and actually see the treatment that he was doing, like see what was happening with the needles. And at that time, Dr. Yang, a lot of his students did not have that privilege. So he was able to really see. And of course, we all know that in acupuncture, we can be told a lot of theory, but if we don't see it, right, it's hard to emulate, right? So he was very grateful to him for that. He said the second thing that he's very grateful to Dr. Yang for was his the reading habit. Dr. Yang he's an incredible scholar. He has studied I think he has a PhD from the Beijing University in philosophy. He's just an incredible scholar. And Zuo took from that, and he followed him in reading all the time. For years that I was with him, you would see that his bookshelves were just numerous, covered with books. He has read them all in detail. They were all marked up and highlighted. He spent a lot of time researching all different kinds of books: Western philosophy, Chinese philosophy, medicine, of both traditions, and also he moved into Taoist alchemy as well. So a very broad scholar. So, and the last thing that Dr. Yang gave him was his name. In other words, Dr. Yang allowed Dr. Zuo to call himself what is called an inner room apprentice, or we would translate it as inner circle apprentice, right? He allowed him to do that. And what that did was that allowed him to, in mainland China, to go out and teach Dong's acupuncture with authority. And he did for the better part of 2 decades, I would say. He was out teaching Dong's acupuncture. And as he was doing that and growing, he became like, as you can see from this photo up here, he became an incredibly popular teacher. And for those of you who can't read the Chinese, this is a Dong Shi's miraculous points, gynecology and cosmetology class, right? And this is the number of people who are doing this. And this was in 2011. So there is, but before that and after that, he has even bigger classes. He's extremely popular. You'll see if you go onto YouTube, you can't really find him if you type in his name in the pinyin, but if you type his name in Chinese characters, you'll find there's a lot, even on YouTube, notwithstanding all the ones that are just Chinese-based video sites. So, but there was something in all those years that he was teaching these miraculous points. Something was bugging him because his students were needling him a lot. Not literally, but figuratively. They were saying, Dong's acupuncture has no theory. right? It's miraculous points, but it doesn't have any theoretical system. And that really bothered him. And so what Zuo did was he spent an incredible amount of time going and researching what the kind of the Tongbei is the easy way for me to say it in Chinese. Tongbei is what the same people of the same age, right? People of the same age as Dr. Dong in Taiwan.
Seniority.
Similar.
Seniority.
Okay. Tongbei is similar level of seniority, right? Similar level of seniority in China. So his kind of the people who were maybe not doing Dong's acupuncture, but were his contemporaries, let's say. He did talking to them about Dr. Dong and talking to all of Dong's kind of apprentices who were alive, right? And really trying to, and then going after the notes and that Dr. Dong left behind, and so that he could actually read the notes themselves rather than having the notes interpreted by, let's say, Dr. Yang or others. And so in that process, he would say that, you know, Dong's acupuncture, like the spirit of Dong's acupuncture is what he uncovered. He really felt like he uncovered the spirit of Dong's acupuncture, and that spirit entered into his marrow, 入了他的骨髓, right? He would say that's how powerful the process was for him. So, you know, in that process, he developed a theory which I will share in just a moment, talk about in just a moment. But in that process, right, he began to and then seeing the spirit, he began to see that it's not about the points, right? You know, because as Dong's acupuncture is taught over and over again, more and more points are being added, in some ways without a lot of theory. And it becomes, use this point for this problem, right? Use this point for this problem, right? Lingu and dabai for sciatic pain. But why, right? It says in the text, you know, when the lung system, right? The lung channel or lung nerve actually is deficient, right? Use lingu and dabai for this kind of sciatic pain. But that understanding what that means and how it was just not clear to many people. So and also he noted that, you know, when Dr. Dong was in his in late 60s and 70s, instead of using several hundred points, he started to use only, you know, 50 or 60 points, 70 points. He didn't use that many points anymore in his practice. Okay? And he surmised that if he had lived a little even longer, that he might have used even just a handful of points. Because you'll see from other Dong's acupuncture textbooks, like one of his disciples, his name is Lai Jinxiong in his textbook, that it does say in the textbook that it's not the points. It has to be more in the areas. But how do you make sense of those areas, right? How do you make sense of that? Well, what I'll say is that his contribution to Dong's acupuncture really became kind of more public in about 2008. And that was the use or the returning to the emphasis of palm diagnosis in Zuo acupuncture, or excuse me, in Dong's acupuncture, and from there, this idea of using 5 Zhang lines related to that. And so, in other words, if you have a person with sciatica, and the person in sciatica, you want to treat with lingu and dabai, you first need to make sure that the lung nerve, right, is deficient. Right? That's the language in the textbook. The lung nerves are deficient, and so you need to look and see that on this palm diagnosis, where you can see the lung area where it's present, that there is usually either a kind of reddish purple or purplish stasis vein there, and that's the main way in which Dong diagnosed. That's the main way he diagnosed and treated, was using palm diagnosis. He also used facial diagnosis. You can use the tongue, but he did not use the pulse. So it is not necessarily the case that if you go to the right, twin pulse, and you check that and it's deficient, that's going to tell you to use lingu and dabai to treat this person's sciatic pain. it's the palm diagnosis. And that, you know, although there's another person who has written a book, including, I believe, the 5 Zong lines in his explanation. When that teacher was in China in 2008 or so, he made no mention of this. It was only after Dr. Zuo kind of went public with this that that person kind of like used it as an explanation. So I think that as far as I know, he is the first person who have introduced this idea of the 5 Zong lies. So Tung's acupuncture, is what Zuo got from it in terms of the spirit was number one, we should know that the reason why we like to use Dong's acupuncture as much is when it's used properly, it is a fully independent and integrated diagnostic and treatment system, right? In other words, you look at the palm, you see where the changes are, it tells you what system or what reaction area you should look for in terms of how to treat. And then let's say if it's in the lung area, then you go to the points that are named metal or lung and see if those points would be helpful in this particular condition. Right? So that's how these things are connected. Right? And so it's as long as you know the palm diagnosis, you can get from the palm diagnosis to where you need to treat, right? And we have points that are named in Dong system. They're not, if you get away from using the numbers, that are named metal and lung, and then you treat those because those are the ones that are going to be relevant in that situation. I'll give you another example. So and Dr. Dr. Yang Weijie likes to use and has taught very helpfully pericardium 6 for the treatment of knee pain. And as far as these 5 Zong line goes, as you see the heart, the red line goes down the middle, right? Goes down the middle. If you were to take your hand, here, because I can't do it here and there. If I imagine that this is my knee or this is my leg, I put my hand on my leg, right? Like that the knee, sort of the kneecap, right, is in the middle. Right? And so the side of the knee is over here, the other side of the knee is over here, and like this, which represents the kidney, is in the back, right? So if you wanted to treat the person's knee pain, and pain is in the front of the knee, point you can use is the heart channel point. I know it's pericardium, but in here we're talking about the heart, right? Use the heart Zong line, and then Dr. Yang added to that liver 3. Now, what's liver 3 or just above liver 3 in Dong's acupuncture? Does anybody know? What's it called? 火主. It's the fire pillar, right? So look, here is red, right here. Here is heart, right? Heart is 5 elements. Which 5 element is it? Fire, right? And so 火主 is most related to that. So if a person has frontal knee pain, using this point with liver 3 is very effective. But if your knowledge doesn't have these 5 Zong lines in it, and I guess I should say, for those of you, if everyone knows, Dong's acupuncture, the reason why you're using liver 3 is act as I call it a traction needle, but it's a guide needle. You're sort of drawing in the qi from this spot, this acupoint that has multiple uses, right? Numerous uses. But how do you make it go where you want it to go? You use like a traction needle, right? Or guide needle to guide it into the channel you want. In Dong system, that one, you use that. So you put it in here, and then you start having the person move their knee. If it doesn't make it better, you use the guiding needle or traction needle, put it in liver 3, and then you get them to move, and it should have their knee pain come down. But if you don't know the 5 Zong lines, then then you might not think, well, if a person's knee pain is on the outside of their knee, then maybe I should be using Lingu and Dabai because the outside of the knee is more related to the lung. Right? If it's on the inside of the knee, I need to use maybe Ganmen, right, or the liver point, right, because it's more related to the liver. And if it's in the back of the knee, then maybe I have to use a point like that has water in it. You can use like Shuijin or other points that have water in them and then use points on the kidney channel to bring the qi into on that side. So this is the way that Dong's acupuncture, I think, should be used. If I can use that word, should be used. This is the way Dr. Zuo uses it. But that being said, this is what he would say is the spirit of Dong's acupuncture. It's Taoist based, it's 5 elements based, and he would say that the layout of the on the hand, the particular layout of the palm diagnosis comes from the He Tu and Luo Shu, which is this ancient way of looking how qi moves, and is kind of the foundation for the 24 qi nodes. And all of these things have this deep Chinese culture and Taoist kind of understanding inside them. They're not, these models, I guess, they're not arbitrary, right? They come from a long-standing tradition. So this is Dr. Zuo. This is who Master Zuo is, and he was before he branched out in his own direction. And we'll talk about his own direction. But I guess I just want to say one thing about my relationship with him, which is important. And I'll be brief. I met Dr. Zuo when he went to get his master's degree at the Beijing University of Chinese Medicine, and we just hit it off. It turns out that we're born not very far apart from each other. We're both born in '69. We're both roosters, and there was actually at one point he was researching some acupuncture in which you use the celestial stems to like decide how you're going to treat a patient. So if the person's you have the person's date of birth and otherwise, and then you start counting from today's date. You're like Zi, Chou, Yin, Mo, and you keep going all the way down to get to okay, it's related to, let's say, okay, it's related to fire, it's related to heart. Then you need to choose the UN source point of like the heart channel. So using like Shenmen or something. So as he was doing that, and he would try to do it for himself, and then he would do it for me, he'd be like, we're the same. Every time I do it, we're the same. And he'd be shaking his head, So we had that kind of energetic connection. But so we were buddies. And he did teach me Tung's acupuncture. But over time, as he grew as a teacher and sort of I became like his student. And so we had this, as many people are Chinese know, I had this very 微妙的关系, a very subtle issues with our relationship where I need to be a student at one point and his buddy at another. So, but over time, I was actually the first person to formally become his, I was the first person to informally become his apprentice back in 2008. And then later in 2012, I sort of did the formal ceremony. So I think this kind of puts me in the position of being his senior apprentice and one of his inner circle apprentices. So that's my relationship with him. I did spend a year when I was at the Guangdong Sheng traditional China, or the Guangdong Provincial Hospital of Traditional Chinese Medicine. When I was there for a year, he was there doing sort of PhD guidance, or he was doing master disciple guidance, and so I was there with him during that whole year. And I've been with him in Macau and in Hong Kong, and so I've been with him together for many years. And one thing that's also interesting is that I spent a year at a Chinese cultivation center called the Great Learning Center outside of Shanghai. And when I was there, he was really not an abbot in that sense, but the Grand Master who was there needed help. And I was able to introduce Dr. Zuo to go there. And since then, he had a wonderful situation establishing his boutique clinic in Shanghai. And he sees quite a lot of the very, very we'll call them interesting people in China. Yeah. So and one of the reasons why you don't know about, so let's see, I'll say this last thing about passing the torch here, or really so Dr. Master Zuo never came out with his tradition and said, hey, I'm presenting Zuo acupuncture initially. Originally, it was all of his students who were like, what do we call this? It's Dr. Zuo who's teaching us this, but he didn't really give it a name. So we all started to call it Zuo acupuncture. So he was not like saying, this is my thing initially. He was just like, he was following this particular trend, everyone using his system and calling it that. up until that point, he was teaching, Dong's acupuncture, and then how to use Dong acupuncture with these other things that he was doing, but primarily, he never really called it Dong's acupuncture. I think it was in 2010 when he held a conference in Qingdao to celebrate I think that would have been the 95th year of life had Dr. Dong lived that long. It was a conference as an anniversary for his grandfather teacher or grandfather master. That was the first time it was mentioned, and it was mentioned by me. I think I'm the person who did that. So it was actually a conference who the honorary guest was Yang Weijie, and there was all these people from China who were there to learn, and all these international Dong's acupuncture practitioners who were there, and Susan Johnson was there among them from the United States, and I was really the only foreigner there, but who did not learn Dong's acupuncture from Dr. Yang. And it turned out that I had written a paper for the conference, and Dr. Zuo said I could have 5 minutes to present during the conference. And then that day when I was getting ready to present, he said, you can have 15 minutes. And he said, you can have half an hour. And he said, you can have 45 minutes. He said, you can have as much time as you need, right? And what I ended up doing, and sort of not intentionally, but I just said clearly that, I said everybody, I am not a student of Dr. Yang. I'm a student of Dr. Zuo's, and when I said that, I said, and I presented this paper, I spent an hour really sort of giving this detailed review of Zuo acupuncture and how powerful it can be, and it was really well received. And I think that's the point where people started talking about Zuo acupuncture. And what I'll say is, in 2017, so this photo that you see up here, the one on top, with Dr. Zuo and I, this is taken on 57th Street in Manhattan at a very nice restaurant. He came here in 2017 because when he was not thinking clearly, let's put it that way, he signed a contract to come to the United States and teach Zuo acupuncture for a 1-day thing. And he came at the invitation of the NYC, I think it's called the NYC TCM alumni. So the New York Chinese, there's a College of Traditional Chinese Medicine, the Alumni Association. It was a packed ballroom at the Sheraton in Flushing, and I think I said I was the only Caucasian person in the room. So everyone else was, the whole lecture was in Chinese, and so I did a couple things. One is he said that, if you want to learn, I'm really passing the torch to Paul to do it. And then he said, essentially, I'm not coming back. And the reason why he doesn't want to come back is because he has such a nice life in China. He has his really nice boutique clinic in Shanghai. His life is now set up where he treats patients for 10 days. He takes 10 days off just to read and kind of develop more of his thinking, and then 10 days to be with his family. And that's how he spends his life. And he doesn't really want to kind of get involved in anything else. So, and this is where I have an apology to make, since I've been absent for so long, because the people really wanted to learn at that point, and I was not ready to teach. So maybe now will be a better time. So this is now we're sort of getting into Zuo acupuncture, and now half this lecture has been used for the introduction of Dr. Zuo, which I think is important. This is then the next part of the lecture here for what is Zuo acupuncture. So this is Dr. Zuo's definition himself. So it's a system of acupuncture developed over 20 years that expresses Taoist alchemy, physiology, and self-cultivation thinking through acupuncture stimulation. Founded on traditional acupuncture and Tung's acupuncture, and the research of Taoist alchemy texts, many secretive texts that many people haven't seen. It is really an open system that is continually drawing upon other treatment modalities, both within Chinese medicine and outside. So knowledge from Western traditions. I'll say one is Western osteopathy is one thing I can clearly say is involved in there, and things he's seen. and then integrating them to serve the purpose of first curing disease, and then second, achieving the physiological and spiritual transformations associated with Taoist alchemy. And there's where you're going from disease to vibrant well-being and longevity. Like that is what's behind what he's doing. That's where his thought system is. So this gets into the next thing about, and I asked if anybody had any familiar with Taoist alchemy at the beginning. We're not going to obviously go into any great depth of it, but a lot of us, people who took my DT4 course, the introduction, has a little bit of this in it, right? In which in Taoist alchemy, you're really trying to cultivate the three treasures, right? For spiritual transformation. So the first part of that is you practice the essence, right? Jing essence, right? You're practicing the essence to transform it, right, into qi, right? And then you're transforming qi then to turn it into spirit. And then you're practicing the spirit to return to emptiness. So in other words, if you're a sickly person, right, the first thing you're trying to do is cultivate your body, right? Cultivate your qi channels, the qi mechanism in your body, so that you restore your own basic well-being and you rid yourself of disease. Then the second thing is, right, as you cultivate enough jing, you now have it that you can transform it into essence, and transform it into qi. And that qi then is what you and I feel when, you're in your experiences of, wow, I feel this sensation going down my arm, or I'm sitting there in meditation and now I feel, my muscles twitching, or I feel like, there's a warmth going in my lower abdomen, or you start to feel the qi movement in the body, right? But once all of your channels and collaterals and, extraordinary vessels, once they're all open and flowing, then you have a chance to bring yourself into a place where you can experience, we'll call it emptiness, right? Returning to the source. We're not going to get into great details of what that means. But if you study Chan Buddhism, I think you'll have with the right teachers, you'll have a pretty good idea of how to, theoretically what that means and how to get to it. Okay, now it's going. Okay, so we know that in these kind of Taoist alchemy traditions, there are different things that people will use, right? They'll use visualization, kinds of meditations called minxiang. They'll use Daoyin. They'll make things that we talk about with qigong. Does everybody know what paired cultivation is? We have one person nodding their head. So if I had one teacher at the Beijing University of Chinese Medicine. He was a young man when I met him. He was a graduate student. He was teaching me how to, really the basic theory of Chinese medicine, how to think in Chinese medicine. But he ended up being by now he might even be the head of the Shanghai Lun department at the Beijing or the Jingguo Yaluet department, maybe in the Beijing University of Chinese Medicine. Very interesting scholar. When he was talking to a Harvard professor who I brought to China, he was saying that if you look at the earliest depictions of qigong, what we would call qigong now, right? The qigong, that word did not exist in ancient times. But if you were looking at the earliest text of it, what you would see is a woman, potentially naked, I don't remember, probably riding a dragon, right? Now, you can think what the dragon refers to, but the woman riding the dragon, that this is a man and woman, right? Cultivating, where, again, in a male-centric society, right? It is a man plucking the yin, right, from a woman, right? And if you get in some of these traditions, you have to be able to do is to engage. I'll have to choose what kind of word. It's not lovemaking, it's engaged in intercourse, maybe is the most neutral word, without desire. If you're engaged in intercourse without desire, the act of moving qi through your sex organs and then into your microcosmic orbit of one, and then through the tongue into the microcosmic orbit of the other, and you have to create this circulation, right? and then you can open up all your channels in that process. But it has to be done without desire. So it is a more advanced level of cultivation. But there are others, that are not so much related to the directly related to inner alchemy stuff, but internal martial arts is something that we all, probably know about. So what is the purpose that these people are practicing these are trying to do? Well, it's 脱胎换骨, which is just translated as shedding the feces and replacing the bones, right? Which is essentially trying to reincarnate yourself, right? As by reestablishing all of your revitalization, right? And some people talking about I exchanged all my organs and now everything, I'm really, really healthy, right? In that level. But in terms of categorizing people's experience, I'll give this is a first stab at that. You'll get more. But the first thing people might fear is this chi movement, right? When you're practicing, you feel, oh, I feel like there's chi coming, something coming up my spine, right? Comes up my spine and then hits my top of my head, and I feel like there's like ants crawling on top of my head. That's actually pretty easy to achieve when you're doing both martial arts and these kinds of practices. The harder part, though, is to get it to go from here down along the Ren channel, right, and back to the Dantian. That seems to be much more harder, or at least it's much harder to experience, because this is yang, and when it's yang, you're experiencing things going up. But this is yin, and it's more subtle, and sometimes it's harder because there's more blockages, right? So, but that's the first idea, is chi movement. And then when you get from there, you start to have mental emotional realm experiences, which I guess we could translate as basically as 境界 in Chinese, right? These kind of phenomenal experiences, the 境界. And this, I will say, is the idea of, revisiting some potentially emotionally difficult things, the transforming of these emotionally difficult things. But it's really on this level. But it's really, we're going to call it on a psychological level. And then we'll say that something happens on, we'll say, a shun level. It's these mystical experiences that can happen, right? And whether or not we might, in our modern science, try to say, well, people is experiencing these kind of mystical experiences, we can relate that to different brain waves, like the theta waves or other waves that people are experiencing, but people haven't go into these other levels of experience, right? So this is what they're doing when they're doing these meditations. This is what they're coming out and saying, oh, these are my experiences, right? So on that first level with the chi transformation, which is the foundation, right? Then you're getting things like channel chi, flushing, or healing, right? Has anybody had that experience with everybody here's an acupuncturist, right? Right? Sort of on your way. But have you ever had the experience of putting needles in somebody, and then the chi goes to where the person's problem is, and they say, if maybe they ring the buzzer and say, they come back in and say, my elbow is hurting, or another part of me is hurting, right? That what happens is when the person has enough vital chi, the chi will try to flush out that disease site. Okay. So I had an example of this once, which a patient who actually never came back to see me, and this is why, I had her on the table and I was doing abdominal acupuncture with her. And when I put the needles in, I was treating her for one problem, which I don't remember what it was. But after I put the needles in, she became alarmed. She said, why are all of my injuries sites from the car accident I had 2 years ago now all screaming, right? Take the needles out, right? And I would say, I tried to explain to her what was happening, but the part of the reason that was so, that particular experience was so difficult, and the thing that she really needed to have treated was because that was the accident that her husband had a stroke when he was driving and crashed the car, and he died, and she remained. So that treatment that I gave her was bringing all of that back, right? And that was way too scary. So I never actually got to treat her again, right? But so like this idea of chi flushing out disease sites, right? That's the first kind of things you might experience. You're expelling pathogens. People have the experience of, like, if you have too much pathogenic cold in your system, you might have pathogenic cold coming out of the soles of your feet, or you might come out of, get goosebumps. And might start to sweat, right? Then you have, after the expelling, you have harmonizing, maybe the feeling of like there's two different liquids inside you, like vinegar and water, and they're kind of moving back and forth, and then they eventually kind of come, they kind of join as one, and they kind of balance themselves out. And then you have this idea of nourishing, in which you're putting needles in to consolidate the person's qi, right? To consolidate in their lower dantian, right? Because that's where you're looking to create this, foundation, right, of nourishing jing to move on, right? So, this is also with the harmonizing. You might also experience these kinds of what I mentioned before, like the microcosmic orbit opening, moving, like these kinds of things. So this is all part of that, and this is just more slides, sort of reiterating that superficial level, the feeling things like pain, warmth, and chi flushing out disease sites, expelling, feeling hot and cold, sweating, teeth chattering, etc., ants crawling on the skin, or vomiting and diarrhea. Right? I did have, I think I might mention it later, but I did have one patient who I treated who came to see me for, on the surface, came to see me for allergies, and mainly that this patient had red and itchy eyes 365 days a year, but were really bad seasonally. And that happened. He had him for 20 years. And when he said at the same time, I ended up going into a deep depression that was also highly seasonally related. So every November, he would kind of go into a really deep depression. But he was taking, I forget what the drug he was taking, but he was on an SSRI. He'd been taking it consistently. But every fall, and usually every spring, he would drop into this deep kind of depression. And so I ended up treating him. We won't go into the details of that right now, but I did write a paper that never got published on it yet. I ended up treating him, and after I treated him, he went home. He said he had like a normal lunch. All of a sudden, he started to feel nauseous, and he started to vomit. Right, and he came back to me. He had no idea what happened, but after that, his eyes never started burning again. I would say, relatively speaking, like his eyes got better, and his depression started to alleviate. And within a very short period of time, he went off of all of his medication, and only it would take, under extraordinary circumstances, take a little bit of his eye medication, but completely changed within a few weeks. But what I was trying to explain to him was that why would he be vomiting? The reason he could be vomiting is because 20 years ago, he was stomaching something, right? There was something he just couldn't swallow, and it was stuck in his system. So rather interpret, and it was the acupuncture that then released that and caused him to expel it, right? That expelling process. So it's important as practitioners, and we'll get into this probably in a later lecture, the interpretation of what's happening, right, is very important. So, Qi transformation acupuncture on a little deeper level, as I said, deeper level, you're opening the various channels and orbits. I talked about the microcosmic orbit. You may know about the Mao and Yo orbit, which is on the right and left sides of the body. And then there's other ones which can stem from the kind of Tibetan, and even, I don't think they talk about it as much in Chan, but in Tibetan Buddhism, they talk about the Zhongmai, not the Chongmai, but the Zhongmai. You hear the difference? Zhongmai versus Chongmai. The Chongmai is the one that we know, right? But it is closely associated with the Zhongmai, which is the central channel. So if there's a microcosmic orbit of the Ren and Du, there is a channel that goes up in between, and that's a channel for wisdom, right? That has to open in order for our wisdom to develop. So these are different things that we start to try to open when you're doing these kinds of acupuncture. So I said at a little deeper level, we're talking about the nourishing and rejuvenating, the dantian nourishing, and then this idea of the central channel, the zhong channel for spiritual transformation. So in that mental emotional realm, we talked about reliving past events, possibly feeling deep emotional release or healing kind of feelings. You might have euphoria or love. Kind of these things, positive things can come as well too after you process the others. I think it's possible that these like psychedelic experiences, people using psilocybin or things, might be also in that area of things, and then these mystical experiences. So this is where Dr. Zuo, this is where Master Zuo got his ideas, were these mystical experiences that people were having from the acupuncture. Like one person having this out-of-body experience. He was treating him in Macau, and he said, like the patient said, I went to Taiwan and I saw my family. I was in the kitchen with my mother, and I saw what my mother was doing. So he said, what is your mother wearing? What exactly is she doing? And after getting all this information, he said, here's the phone, call her and check. And when they called, it was exactly right. And so that was one of these experiences that was like, there's something here, right? And we don't actually have to have it be through acupuncture, right? People have these experiences that are not acupuncture related. But the whole idea behind this is that, is it possible to use acupuncture to do it as well, right? So, and of course, the ultimate thing is spiritual transformation, wisdom, which is in not your ordinary wisdom, but prajnaparamita wisdom understood through Buddhism, or deep levels of samadhi, which are connected to wisdom. So these questions that Dr. Zuo had, which were, essentially, is even acupuncture alchemy possible, right? Can or differently stated, can acupuncture be used to express the Tao? Has it been, if it can, why hasn't it been done previously in history? And then maybe we won't go into this much, but is it ethical, or is it the right thing to do for people? But the main thing that I would say that it was to him, right, is that the chi mechanism of inner elixir cultivation is the same one as in Chinese medicine. They're using the same system. So if they're initiating these things through their mental activities, let's say, why can't we do it through acupuncture needles? That was his, as he would say, his big gallbladder summation or surmising, right? 好大胆的想这个, right? So again, I talked about some of these early experiences he had. We won't really go into the detail on these because we don't have a lot of time, but suffice it to say that his way of using and thinking about things that he sees on the body was able to kind of give him these experiences, right? But I don't have a lot of experienced acupuncturists in the room, I don't think, right? Or even online. Most everybody's students, right?
But if anybody is a practitioner, please shout out.
I mean, so like your experiences in your life, right? Or your experiences as an acupuncturist. Okay, so the things that I'm saying for that licensed practitioner might be similar. You might have had similar experiences, right? You might have had similar experiences that people are saying they feel like pathogenic cold or damp is being expelled from them, right? You might have had I had a female patient who like relived a traumatic event, when I was giving her acupuncture. This was in China. I think I was using abdominal acupuncture at the time too. And I had a patient who, after I treated here in New York, decided on a drive home, just had to pull over and just let out all this guilt and grief that she had, and she couldn't continue to drive. But when she did, she was fine and she kept going. I had one patient who I did a lot of lancing for, who had a lot of childhood difficulties. Let's say, came from a very wealthy family, was not liked by her parents. Was always kind of the black sheep, and had a lot of grievances. And she was holding on to a lot of things, including a lot of papers and documents. Her house was filled with these things. And after I did the bleeding, she was free, and she started dumping everything out and cleaning out her apartment. But these are kinds of experiences that people can have, right? So, what I would say is the difference, as all the practitioners who are in the audience or who watch this later, you and I can will have similar experiences. But what I would suggest is that, Dr. Zuo, through Master Nan, who was the person at that cultivation center that I was at, he had access to a lot of secret Taoist alchemy texts, right? And he has the literary capacity to really go in deep and understand them. And I would also say that when I was in China, they talked about people being really good clinicians or really good scholars of Chinese medicine, that it was hard to be both, right? The famous doctor at the Beijing University of Chinese Medicine named Wang Hongtu was a scholar of the Neijing, and his lectures were highly respected. Every year, every January, he would read the entire text again. But either he didn't do clinic or nobody sought him for clinic, right? Whereas other practitioners who were really good at at their trade, let's say, or at their skills as acupuncturist or herbalist, they knew all the classic texts, but they weren't like giving lots of scholarly lectures. So finding someone who can do both is difficult, right? Dr. Zuo is one of those people. Dr. Yang Weitie is also one of those people. But for us, I'll suggest that we might have had all these individual experiences of someone having out of body experience or someone having these kind of things, but we weren't able to sort of put it into a systematic understanding and then connect it with whatever systems we might need, and a unifying way of approaching it, like a way of thinking to make it work, right? So I would say that Dr. Zuo was someone who really suggested, sort of put the effort in to do that. So is it possible? I would say yes, at least partially. He would say yes, at least partially. I don't know that he's ever had any, at least not since I talked to him, has anyone who's really become with a human and heaven uniting, right? Tianren He Yi, which is but you can get people a lot of a good portion of the way there. It's not easy, but you can do it. So historically, I guess I would no one has ever done this. And I'll say that, there are a lot of people in our Western community talking about Taoist alchemy acupuncture, right? But I would say that this is a modern thing. And I'm not discounting any of those people who are doing Taoist alchemy acupuncture now, right? Or the way they're approaching this. But historically, it didn't exist. And there was evidence, obviously, of Sun Tzu Miao in the Tianjin Yifang, right? Tianjin Yifang, in which he was using herbs, right? He was using herbs to have these kinds of experiences, right? They talked about, I think, I talked to Ted Kapchik about it. He was talking about, all the things inside the Tianjin Yifang that were like really strange, kind of like summations of things. I don't remember anything off the top of my head, but all these are referring to, kind of entities that are kind of stuck inside people and blockages of these kinds of things, right? And using herbs to kind of open these things up and move through. So if you're trying to open up your central channel, is there a combination of herbs that can help you do that? But the reason why he would say is it doesn't happen in history is because in order to get the kind of results you want, you need to have really thin needles. The kinds of needles that we're only now in our modernity able to make. So we're talking about needles that are like, I tend to use the Japanese millimeters, but like, 0.12, 0.14, 0.16. These are 0.18. So these are needles that are like, what is it? 46 gauge, 44 gauge, 42 gauge, 40 gauge, maybe 38 gauge. So they're using like really thin needles. And this reminds me of what Ted Kapchik had said to me a while back, which is that, if you want to affect the spirit level of a person, not change things like in a physical way, the amount of herbs you're using is much less. You're taking, it's not quite like a homeopathy type thing, but you're using small amounts of herbs to affect that more, what is it? The qi to the shun level, because it's a more subtle amounts of herbs to affect the more subtle part of our being, rather than, heavy herbs and heavy quantities to affect the other. We'll leave the question if it's ethical. I have an answer for it, but we'll leave that for now. So this is where I would give a much deeper introduction to Zuo acupuncture, but I don't have that luxury. I would say that these are special characteristics of this, and one is that Zuo's use of he emphasizes a lot. You have to find the Taoist way of interpreting the body's language, right? So normally we think of disease and manifestations of disease as problems. Like, this is the thing we want to get rid of. Instead of looking at it as the body talking to us or telling us, I have a problem, and this manifestation is going to help you understand how to make it better. Or it's the body's own wisdom expressing itself. Going back to that person who after I did the acupuncture, went home and vomited, right? So as acupuncturists, we might say, oh my God, did I do something wrong? The person vomited afterwards. But that would be the wrong interpretation. The Taoist interpretation would be better, and that is the body's wisdom is finding a way to rid itself of the disease, to expel the disease, right? So there's a lot to say about that, but we're only going to touch on this one little point here. The other is, as I said, Zuo acupuncture is an open system. Zuo never at one point, and especially after 2010 in that conference, he didn't want to be known as a Dong's acupuncture master. He sort of wanted to be an acupuncture master, right? His own master. And eventually the establishment of Zuo acupuncture was his way of doing that. But in some ways, he would say that he never, he hasn't invented anything, although that's not entirely true, but he hasn't really invented anything. He's built on what people have, these ancient traditions and classical perspectives and extended them, right? And then he's done something which others haven't done, is finding ways to integrate them, right? And using a way of thinking to govern that, right? And so in that idea is like, here are these various systems that you can use, right, for treating. And, up here it says Dong's acupuncture, right? And using the various aspects of that. 12 regular channels, the law, the extraordinary vessels, you can use using those. As I mentioned, using osteopathic tradition. Let me just give you an example. What he would say is that Westerners and Western science is very good at, the word he would use would be facts, like looking at factual things, or maybe the better word is knowledge. But it's Chinese traditions that are better at exercising wisdom. And so in this situation, let's take a look at this idea of trigger points, right? TRPs is one of the annotation here for trigger points, right? So we can relate that to the sinews channels in acupuncture and knots in the sinews channels. So from an osteopathic perspective, there is a somatovisceral reflex, which I think is important to remember, right? But that's not necessarily connected to the trigger points, right? So you can have, like, I have a pain here and there's nothing there. It's a reflex of what's happening in your kidney or somewhere else. That's why you have the pain. So it's a matter of it's a reflex, and vice versa. You can have pain in your kidney that's kind of related to something happening in the exterior. But what Zuo was able to do is to use sinews to treat mental emotional issues, to use these kind of deeper kind of gynecological issues, all kinds of internal medicine issues. So something that I think is really helpful to know. And then Zuo would use, he's big on using things like bloodletting, right? Bloodletting is something that I find myself doing a lot, and when it's merited, and it's extremely helpful. So anyway, he's integrating all of these different symptoms, and that includes imaging thinking, which is the word that we've been using, right? So like, looking at the hand, we did the palm diagnosis here, and you have the various things happening here. You also have the imaging of the turtle. So you might say Korean hand acupuncture, right? You can use that imaging to put on there, but it goes beyond that. You can use the celestial stems, right? Right? Which kind of can map things out as well. So you have 子丑寅卯辰巳午未，对吧? Going along that line. And you also have the earthly branches. 甲乙丙丁戊己庚辛壬癸. There's different maps that you can use to map a hand. So he's good at like using all of these and integrate into a system. So I finished that. Oh, and then the way of thinking that. So I'm skipping over many slides and what would have been a presentation on the system and how to use it, or at least that part of it, to move into, like, hopefully more quickly into the Taoist alchemy. I know we're now at a time point here where I should be opening up for questions, but I think really I need a little more time here. The one thing that I want to impart to you as students of acupuncture is that, remember, if you were to look at Chinese culture and Chinese culture in general, and you were to say, in the classical traditions that we know of are the Confucian tradition, right? And the Taoist tradition, right? And in the Confucian tradition, you have Confucius having read the Book of Changes. And in the Book of Changes, he looked at the Qian Gua as the Gua, right? the Tiangua, which is 3 solid lines. That is yang, right? It is strength. And from that, he built this idea that, 强而不息, right? If you're speaking Chinese, 强而不息, which is if you're in life, you push forward and you push and you don't rest, right? It's a life of doing. And he had a life of doing where he was trying to convince all of these kings at the time to follow the way of being a gentleman scholar and having this, the emperor acts like an emperor, the magistrate a magistrate, the father a father, the son the son. Everybody has their role in life. It's a very active thing. Creating big cities, right? Big cities with lots of culture, right? With the literary culture and music. But Lao Tzu also read the Book of Changes, right? And he came up with he emphasized the kun, or the kungwa, right? With all the broken lines, all of the yin, right? He's all about softness, about following, right? And so we're practicing a Taoist tradition, right? In which water doesn't, let's say, water can carve over time, but water follows, right? Water follows the path. Slowly, with that following, it creates its own way, right? But we are trying to follow. And that's important because when you're talking about doing this kind of qi transformation acupuncture and being an acupuncture in general, you need to put yourself, as he would say, in a very humble position. The Neijing says, 以病为本, 以功为标. Bing wei bun is the disease or the patient is the root, and the gong wei biao is the practitioner is the branch. If you turn that around and make it's all about me, and I'm gonna do this treatment, and in fact, I'm gonna take my knowledge, right, and put you into like my own rationalization what I should do. You've left the Tao. You're not following what the patient's body language is telling you, and you're not following that to do the right treatment, right? So a master follows the Tao. He does not impose and does not force, right? And with you're doing these kinds of things with as a practitioner, you need to really pay attention to that. Right? So that's one hint of like what's behind the Zuo acupuncture there. So as I said, humility in the Tao, right? I did the 以功为本, 以病为本, 以功为标, right? And I would recommend that if you want to be a Taoist alchemy, or at least a Taoist level practitioner, you need to cultivate this. And so he would say that if you really interpret the body's language correctly, you're looking for insight through your inspection of the person's body, and you're looking for wisdom, and what you're not trying to do is create this kind of rationalization of what's happening to the person, which quite frankly is what we do in what we call TCM acupuncture. We get all the information, we use our models, we use the 8 principles, and then we rationalize what we should do, and then rationalize the treatment. And if you look at what I talked about initially with Tung's acupuncture, is you don't need rationalization. Person comes in, they tell you whatever their problem is. In some ways, you can forget about it. You do your palm diagnosis, you do facial diagnosis, possibly tongue diagnosis. You do your diagnosis, and you say, whatever this person's problem is, it is lung related. And then I look for the points that are lung or metal related. I find the ones that are sensitive, and I use that to then create the change. I took myself out of it. I trusted the model that's there, this model, this framework, and the model of where the points and the names. I trust that. I take myself out of it. But most importantly, I follow what that person's body is telling me, right? I'm interpreting the language, right? That's important. So as Dr. Zuo would often say, if you're following in his tradition, first, do you have enough of a knowledge base that you know what to look for? Do you all of those individual frameworks, osteopathy, coronal acupuncture, Dong's acupuncture, traditional acupuncture? Do you have all these frameworks or imaging? Do you have all these in mind that within that you can start to look for where the problem might be? In other words, then can you use keen observation and sensitivity to find what it is you're looking for, to find that sign of telling you, but this is where the problem is, and this is how to treat it. And then, even if you can find it, then you use your skills effectively to treat the problem. Well, none of these things are a given, and at any point, if you have missed one of these, the miss is as good as a mile, right? So, as I mentioned, we're relying on the system, not our own rational thinking in this process, because, as he would say, the thing to be most afraid of is this, right? This is the thing to be most afraid of, because this is where all the mistakes can happen. And actually, I got into a discussion with my students in the clinic about, they're talking about, oh, it's about intuition. And actually, it's not about intuition. Intuition still involves you too much. What it's about is, we will call it resonance or direct apprehension, in which the person walks in and you know what to do. It's a knowing, it's a gnosis. It's not an insight. It's not intuition. So there's a lot to unpack there. But the main thing, the difference there is with that gnosis, with that indirect apprehension, you've emptied yourself out. You're empty. There's no ego there floating to try to filter and understand things. So that's a bigger conversation. Okay, so acupuncture aims, we talked about this. Ideally, you want to help someone through multiple levels of their well-being. Talked about this in mind, body, spirit, et cetera, et cetera. But this is the part that you need to know, and that is that the kind of overarching theme of this, and this is how I often treat, is the idea of this 三条一致, which is 3 regulations and 1 governance, which is the governance of the spirit. So the 3 regulations involved, I mean, as an acupuncturist, you have needles in your hand. What you can do with those needles is you can let blood, you can release the sinews, you can regulate the qi. So these are the 3 regulations. And in doing that process, you can step into the next level. Then you begin to create the governance of the spirit, which is bringing that person to a place that's very peaceful, a peaceful mind, and a harmonious emotional life, right? And then a mind that can be at ease. And then from there, you could step into the other kind of spiritual transformations that we were talking about. Regulating the blood vessels, we have yang law, which are the ones that are on the surface of the body. The ones that we normally use are the macro law. Then you have micro law. And what I'm going to be introducing today is the idea of needling on the hand, and why you would do this thing called, the second one here is called wei luo cixue, this kind of micro vessel needling on the hand, and why that's important, or at least give you an idea of how you can start to use it. And then there's something called yin law, which is the blood vessels that are deeper inside the body, in which, when years ago, when Nigel Dawes was doing a meetup, I was here, and he was talking about in Kamwo, he was talking about oketsu. Everybody know what oketsu is, right? The blood stasis thing. And so he goes, I know as soon as I say this, someone's going to come up here and prove me wrong. It was ironic that I happened to be in the audience. He said, the only way to treat blood stasis internally is with herbs, right? And so I got up there and I showed him afterwards, after lecture, I showed him a video of how in China we were now using the syringe heads, right? Syringe heads to needle deep into the person and let the blood out inside. So there's many places. I'm not going to tell you where they are right now, but that was a way to actually change internally some things that you couldn't get to before, and you do it very, very quickly with that, as opposed to herbs, which take a much longer time. So yin luo cixue. Regulating the sinews. We now affectionately or unaffectionately know this as dry needling, right? But when I was in China, I actually had the pleasure of spending some time with Andrew Nugent Head, and also we were going around, and meeting various teachers, and one was Lu Dingho. Lu Dingho was not an acupuncturist. He was at the physical education school. And at the physical education school, he was doing research on how to help athletes recover more quickly. And long story short, from the Neijing to going into the countryside to find someone who was practicing this particular technique, he came out and discovered that if you needle these skeletal muscle obliquely, right, you can get it to release very quickly. And the muscle fibers, which, when you work, either when you work out or you have a repetitive strain injury, muscles will tear, right? So there's micro tearing that goes on. And what happens is over time, if you, with a repetitive strain or a major injury to a trauma, the muscles will not. The actin and myosin and the fibers will then depolarize and degrade and end up getting stuck like this. And what he showed in his research is if that needle hits that muscle knot on an angle, right, they immediately release. And over the next 2 to 3 days, they will repolarize and realign, right, back to normal. And so you can take care of difficult problems with that way. So Dr. Zuo used this with this idea of, I think, with the idea of trigger points or sinews knotting, and then use that, and potentially even some trigger point mapping, use these kinds of things to then take that knowledge and put it and use Chinese wisdom, right, to figure it out. So a person, let's say, who's having a headache, right? A person who's having a headache in the back of their head, you can go into their, let's say, go into their gastroc, and instead of just needling, gosh, what is Chenshan? What is called UB? What point Chenshan is? I don't remember. I don't know the names of the points. The one in the middle of the calf. 57. Okay, thanks. Yeah. So instead of just needling that, you can find the muscle knots there that might be pulling, as we know now, the fascial trains throughout the body and causing this part of this person's headache, or more simply, the lower back or other places. So you can start to use that, right? Trigger points won't actually create a connection there, but you can use the sinews channels up top of the trigger points to figure that kind of stuff out. And there's when I treat seasonal allergies and people have problems, I use the back of the head in a special place, and it works extremely well for that kind of stuff. Regulating chi channels, I mentioned that you're using these really kind of thin needles to do it. The Tao, okay, well, everything I said before, the governance of the spirit, we mentioned that, to have these experiences. And then now we can talk a little bit about that, what I wanted to mention, which is how do you treat a person who has yang qi deficiency and blood stasis? So if the person has a general deficiency constitution, right, are we supposed to bleed them? No. Not by what we normally would think. And I remember in those years when I was sitting across from Dr. Zuo in a restaurant, and we were talking about that, like, you can't bleed someone who's really deficient. And he didn't want to tell me. He wanted to tell me that he was doing it, he knew how to do it. He was like, "You can," And I was like, no, there's no way to do it. And he was like, "Can." But eventually he told me what he does. He uses the hand. He uses what he would call these micro vessels on the hand. There are different ways to do it. One of them is Tung's acupuncture, and where you can potentially call it a what is it? Earthly branches, right? Earthly branches layout. And another is with just using it as this kind of microsystem, just like you were maybe like in Korean acupuncture. Not exactly the same layout as Korean, but similar to that. You can use the bleeding here with the idea that if you what was the chaos theory, right? In chaos theory, you have this idea that if a butterfly takes off in Brazil, right, you can create this systemic effect. So in other words, what he would say is, yes, normally when we want to bleed, we want to bleed in, like, at least in China, in copious amounts, right? If a person has a problem, right? We're not bleeding just a couple of drops here and there. But here, he would use the idea that, eat, you maybe tell me the Chinese, 一滴水可以波涛海浪. There's an expression like that. One drop of water can cause a tidal wave, right? And in this situation, if you get just right on the hand, you can actually create this major systemic effect for people. So this is what he was trying to convey. So in the bleeding on the hand, it follows in one layer. What I want to talk about today is, you can think of it for yourself. If a person, let's say, has a recalcitrant problem with their elbow, you could go into the relatively the middle articulation here of the index finger, which represents the the upper extremity. And if you see a really nasty stasis vein there, you might do a little lancing there to bleed that, right? That's pretty straightforward. You can, as long as you figure out where the body parts are. But in this one, how would you get a person to start expelling, let's say either expelling their pathogenic cold from them, right? Here you could use two. One would be the bleeding on the finger pad of the spleen or the middle finger, which has heart related to it, has fire related to it, as I said, with the earthly branches, right? This is related to heart, related to fire, but it's also related to the spleen for another reason. And it works particularly well if a person has a blockage in their middle jiao that is causing their part of their qi flow inhibition, right? Or their qi mechanism is obstructed for that reason. So you're not just bleeding anywhere in the finger pad. You're looking for these little tiny stasis veins, right? These little tiny microstasis veins that are in the middle of the finger pad. They could be reddish purple or purple, right? And the closer they are to the center of the finger pad, the better. And if you take a needle and you do a quick release on that, and you squeeze the blood out, that is one way in which you can start. Especially, people have a lot of stuff that's stuck in their middle jiao, and it's a chronic problem with it. And there is a blood stasis signs to it, right? The person has to have blood stasis as part of the pattern. We won't go into what constitutes the blood stasis pattern, but you have to have that in order for it to work, right? So they have the blood stasis pattern, they have a purple vein in here, and you can release it. The second one that's a part of that then is the little finger, the kidney, right? Again, for the same reason, you're looking at, this is related to the kidney, right? The primordial yin and yang here that we're looking with, the root of the yuan qi is in the kidney. So you have the post heaven and the pre heaven. You've got fire, you've got water, and you've got all these things that are layered into that understanding. But this layout, as we said, is an extension of Tung's acupuncture. In Tung's acupuncture, there's no bleeding of the hand, right? That's not something you do. You needle in the hand, but you don't usually bleed the hand. Usually it's used, this is used for diagnosis in that area. So that's this part of it. And I would be happy to demonstrate that today. If anybody has the right hand or is willing to do it, we're happy to do it, right? Dr. Zuo or Master Zuo loves to do what is it? Demonstrations during his lectures or during his teachings. Probably most important thing. And for all years, you saw those big, the kind of how many students in class. For years, I was the person who was doing the demonstrations. I would be the person up there, like accompanying him and doing that work. One time I was bleeding somebody, and I don't think I did a great job. So I did it once, I did it twice, and did it 3 times, right? And so a person in the audience raises their hand, and says, Dr., Master Zuo, why did he bleed 3 times? And so Master Zuo says, well, there's only be 3 reasons. One, or I think it was 2 reasons. That was something. One reason was that there were 3 places he needed to bleed 3 times. The other was that he missed. I think I was sweating at that time, so I think it was that I missed. So, qi ji sheng jiang fang. This is so. If I gave you, we're talking about expelling pathogenic cold from a person. There's 2 aspects to that. One is with blood stasis, expelling pathogenic cold or treating a person with pathogenic cold, in a yang qi deficient constitution, and you're trying to expel the pathogenic cold. You need 2 things for that. One is you need qi movement to get rid of the cold, but you also need fire to stoke the lower dantian. So you have to judge which it is you need, right? And I'm going to give you 2 combinations. You would decide which is the one you would need first. This one that I'm giving you is the expelling a pathogenic qi, right? So in this one, you're going to use these 4 points in this order, the order that they're on there. So these are Dong's points, but I have, for the most part, given them to you in traditional, standard acupuncture names. So the first is the point menjin or xiangu, right? This is stomach 43. And when you're first needling, that's the first point on the right leg. Then you're going to use on the right leg. This is a little bit of there's a little bit of a discrepancy that you'll see here, and I'll tell you in a second why. You're going to use the right shui qu, the Dong's acupuncture called shui qu, which is essentially gallbladder 42. But if you're a Dong's practitioner, you're going to go, no. Shui qu is not gallbladder 42. It's gallbladder 41. But here, we use gallbladder 42 because of it's another way, it emphasizes the way Dr. Zuo uses his needles. And again, we're not getting into this today, except to say that when I was in China, the research that was being done on acupoints was pointing to fascial, the fascia, which is a kind of more, it's kind of, we call it was a membrane, but whether it's osteomembrane or it's fascia muscle membranes, like what we call jinmor, or the fascia. This is where the chi channels are, right? And if you're going to needle somebody, and let's just pretend this is my foot and this is liver 3 in this example, right? If you're going to needle somebody and you needle like this perpendicularly, when you go into the channel isn't very deep, right? When you go in, if you needle this much, you're going to get, let's say, or at most a half a ton of the needle shaft is going to be in the channel, right? And so the possibility of the magnification of the effect would be greater is if you needled on an angle, right? And so you're needling deeper up into like a ton or more inside, and more of that needle shaft is in the channel. And this also could be understood as an extension of Dong's acupuncture, where they do, what do they call this? The upside down horse. You guys have that? The inverted horse. It's called Dao Ma Zhen. And I don't know what they translate into English, but what usually, in order to magnify the effects of a certain acupuncture point, you put 2 needles in that place. And if you put 2 needles in there, and imagine I put 2 needles in here, when horses are dead, right? Their legs are straight up, so it's called the upside down horse. That's what they call Dao Ma Zhen. So apparently they probably don't call that here now. But anyway, you amplify the effect by putting 2 needles close to each other in the same place. So this is what that's doing. So we go in from gallbladder 42 and we go under the tendon to go to gallbladder 41. Okay. So then after that, you use the left muliu. That's a Dong's point. I don't know the number, but you'll see the number in the slide coming up next. There'll be muliu, and then you use the left huozhu, right, which is essentially liver 3. But you can go in from liver 3 and go on that angle like I just showed you all the way up to huozhu. Right? So you needle in that order, and you needle from the right leg first, and then the left. Does anybody who's kind of study with me, or anybody know why you would do the right first and then the left? What's the difference between the right side of the body and the left?
Like he goes up on the left and then goes down on the right.
Right. She descends on the right, and then it ascends on the left, right? In that circular motion. And in that process, then, if you want things to circulate, especially if there are blockages, you start on the right side. You start on the right side to draw things down and then send it up, right? So that's the idea behind it. And there's more in there. You can look in there. There's more 5 element stuff in there. There's a lot more in there in this formula, but we're going to leave it there. These are the points, and I'm going to let you just think about they're not in the order that they're not essentially in the order that they're being used, but the only thing I guess I should point out is muliu. Muliu, as you can see, it's at a lot of Dong's acupoints are at the we'll call it the intersection of structures, like intersection of bones. And there was one time when there was one of Zuo's students who said something that he really latched onto, which was, in the Tao, right? The Tao produces the one produces the two, and then the two produces the myriad of all things, right? The myriad of things. Dao sheng yi, yi sheng er, sheng san, san sheng er. It's the Tao produces the two, and then the two produces the three, when the three produces the myriad of all things, right? So the Tao produces one, which is qi. Qi produces the two, which is yin and yang. The yin and yang that produce the three, which is the heaven, earth, and humanity, the three realms. And it's these three realms that produce all the myriad of things. Here you have two in the intersection of two. And this, if you look at branches, right, this is where everything happens, right? On a tree, everything happens at the intersections right there. This is where this thing sprout. So he emphasized that as a lot of Dong points have that. So Mulyo is between the third and the fourth digit, third and fourth digit at close to the inner there. But again, if it were me, I would be going down a little bit farther down and needling up. Same way I'll be using with stomach 43. So again, this is, and as I mentioned, where Shui Chu was already. So that's how you expel pathogenic cold. And with that particular formula, I have had people, when I use this and even add Da Cha to, which I'll go over in a moment, when you do that, and then you cover them up, right? Especially covering up their feet, they will, especially if they care about it, they might tell you, you left the room, you covered my feet, you covered me up, but you didn't cover my feet. I'm like, yeah, I did. They're totally sealed. No, I can feel the cold draft on my feet. Like, that's not coming from outside. That's coming from inside you. Like, that's the expelling of pathogenic cold. So, but in order for a person to do that, they have to have enough qi in them to do it, enough yang qi. If they don't, then you can use this point combination, which is establishing the primordial yin and yang, right? Li Ji Zhen Fa, right? This is used for nourishing Mingmeng fire in the lower dantian, right? In the yang qi. I'm just going to put my jacket on because I have the air conditioning blowing on me.
Oh, sorry.
My yang qi. My yang qi. Okay. So in this point combination, again, this is the order. Since I tend to use this on women mostly, we'll just go over the female one. So you start with the right Huolian, and Huolian is essentially spleen 3. The right Huolian is spleen 3. Then you use the left Huochuan. Huochuan. Now Huochuan is very similar to Sanjiao 6. But when you're using it, you work your way up the radius, the radius here, and you're looking for almost like what they call where the bone breaks. There's a divot there, and that's where you want to do it. It's often sore, right? And you want to needle in along the bone, right? Along the bone. So in between the bones and the tendons. It takes a while to figure out, but once you get in between the bone and the tendon, it'll go in easily. Usually you need to be in this position with your hands, with the person's hands like this to make it easier. So up like this, because if their hands are down like this, you can't get it in. You have to put your hands up here. So that's the next one. So that's Huochuan. And then you do the opposite Huochuan on the right side. And then you do the left Huolian again. The left Huolian again. In addition to that, you could also add to that bilateral liver 3. And if you think about it, if you get liver 3 and you get spleen 3, you can get them, then the needles sort of to go into the same place, right? They center on the same place inside the person. So, and you guys can think about why you would use for male, you would use the left Huolian first, and the right you would use the for women you use the right Huolian first. This is not moving. So these are the points. You can do that. You can look there. So you're using these kinds of very thin needles, particularly on spleen 3. I tend to use a 0.14 millimeter needle. On the other ones, I use a 0.16 usually, but be in that range. You're ideally not trying to have any local needle sensation, right? Any local needle sensation. It's all about the qi transformation and the kind of the warming of the dantian in this particular case. That's in general for all qi transformation acupuncture. And this particular combination, I'll also leave this for you as something to consider, that Chun and Hai Shi, right? Or 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. or 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. are the best times to do it, right? And then remember, you cannot force it. In other words, with all of these qi transformation type acupuncture that we're doing, there's a lot of variables. And one of them is, whether or not you do it well. Another one is whether or not the person really needs it, you've diagnosed it correctly. Another one is whether or not the person is ready for it, right? They can relax and you can actually do it. There's a lot of variables that go in. And we always respect the wisdom of the body. So you might be thinking, okay, I need to warm this, I need to have this particular effect. But the body takes what you give it because you give it at the right stimulation and it does what it needs for the person rather than what you think should be done. This is another point combination. I've gone way over time anyway, so I'm not gonna go over this too much. But this is another one, which essentially it's a version of the Four Gates, but it has a little deeper meaning because it uses point Da Cha, and I can show you the point Da Cha here, which is Zuo actually likes the nickname Zuo Da Cha because this is the point that he, I would say, discovered. And it really says it kind of encapsulates his way of thinking, both using this from an imaging perspective, which has a lot of imaging kind of like things that he overlays into this, and different ways he uses it. It'll take a while to talk about, but we won't do it today. But this is his big point, but he uses this a lot in this particular case because it can really warm the lower jiao, especially the left one, the left Da Cha. This is how we needle it, right? And there you have that. So this is this summary, right, of Zuo acupuncture. It's an open system. It's continually drawing upon other treatment modalities, both within Chinese medicine and Western traditions. The integration is done through the guiding principles, which I gave you in terms of interpreting the body's language in a Taoist way, stimulating the body with these tools that we now have, and moving a person along not only in their path for health and well-being, but eventually their own spiritual transformation. There's a lot more to talk about. I talked about it much more over time than I should, but if anybody wants to learn more, let me hear from you. And when I get to putting together a course on it, I will let you know. Any questions?